All right, I see a live.
And here we are. And welcome to another Cliff's List webinar. My special guest tonight is Bobby Rio of TSB Magazine. Bobby has been around the community for, I guess, ages now, and very experienced and knowledgeable guy. And I'm very pleased to have him as my guest tonight. Bobby, for those who aren't familiar with you and your history and your experiences and everything, how about a narrative about, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Cool. Yeah, and first off, glad to finally get on and do a call with you. We've both been around for a really long time, and it's funny that this is really the first time we're actually got a chance to do one of these together. So it's cool. So yeah, I was stumbled onto the whole dating advice community in 1998. I don't even know if I didn't even find it online, which most guys did. I found in the back of an issue of Playboy magazine was an article about a guy named Ross Jeffries, and it sort of captured my attention. I was struggling with girls at the time. I had probably like the worst high school experience you can have in terms of women. I never kissed a girl in high school and got to college, and I was well on my way to the same fate. I was extremely shy. I just had no clue what to do. Girls were just foreign to me. And although the issue of Playboy and Ross Jeffries and all that stuff didn't really lead me anywhere in terms of using that material or anything, it kind of opened up my eyes of this idea. Wow, I don't have to settle for what I was getting at the time, which was nothing. And over the next couple of years, just really began first working on self-confidence, then conversation, because as an introvert, that was my biggest weak point. And then gradually it moved into like, okay, I've got the conversation down, but I kept running into like the nice guy pattern and friend zone. So it was almost like a continual evolution of, okay, I got one thing handled. I'm not shy anymore, but my conversations suck. Then it was like my conversations are good, but I can't keep the attraction alive. And it was little by little, just slowly refining things. And I think about 2006, that's when I kind of got into the teaching side of it, because by then I had been doing really well. I had been, the guy that my friends were going to, and kind of started branching out, not really teaching it professionally. I was teaching it for free online for years, just, going into forums and kind of, sharing my advice and stuff.
Well, tell us a little bit about that advice. Like what's I think in a lot of ways, everybody's got a certain strategy or approach, and maybe tell us a little bit about your approach, and I guess also how it maybe has improved over time.
Yeah. So initially, as a guy who was extremely shy, right? So my initial approach was just understanding the dynamics of flirting. And to me at the time, it opened up an entirely new world, right? And I always tell a story how there was this conversation I was having with a girl. And this was really like, if you can go back and have a moment that just wakes you up, this was it. I was having this conversation with this girl at a party, and it turned out at the time I was really into health food and working out and stuff, and she happened to be too. And we connected instantly over that topic. So for the next hour and a half at this party, we were talking about our favorite, protein bars and our what kind of yoga we do, all the things. And in my head at the time, I was thinking, wow, we're soulmates. I connect with this girl. We have so much in common. And, an hour and a half into the conversation, she's like, I got to go upstairs and use the bathroom. And she doesn't come back. So I start looking for her, and I find her upstairs. I open up a door, and she's making out with this other guy there. And this other guy that she's making out with was a kid I knew who was like the complete opposite of a health freak. He was drinking, drugs, all that kind of stuff. And it was kind of the wake up call that it doesn't really matter how much you have in common with them. And it doesn't even matter the way you talk to them. If you're not listening, if you're not moving things past that generic, hey, we have a lot in common, nice guy conversation, to start introducing flirtation and teasing into it. So that was the first breakthrough I had, was just that realization that I've got to start teasing girls. So then I went on this journey of, okay, I've got to tease them. How do I move a conversation from, oh, you know, you go to the same college I do, to a teasing level? And one of the things I always tell my students now that was a breakthrough for me was this realization that you don't need to worry about transitioning. So I used to be stuck in a conversation like, let's just use travel, right? Oh, you've been to this country. Oh, I've been there too. And I'd get stuck there, and I'd wind up talking about something like travel for a half an hour, and then that thread would die, and we'd both be like, now we have nothing to talk about. And what I realized was that you can just jump around, right? And like, you can just say, oh, that reminds me of this, and bring something into it. Or if you get stuck in a bad conversation, I like, let's say you start talking to a girl and she starts bringing up the weather, right? Because girls, we always take the blame for things, but a lot of women are really bad conversationalists too, and they don't really know how to have a fun, flirtatious conversation. So maybe she starts bringing up the weather, and you want to take the role of the leader and change it, right? You don't want to, just because she's talking about that, or she makes a comment about it, doesn't mean she actually wants to talk about it. And that's a realization that I think guys need to have, is that you need to direct where the conversation goes. And you can do it as simple as saying like, hey, before I answer that, I've got to ask you something, right? I was just with my friend over there, and he's got this, you know, and whatever, you know, whatever's naturally happening at the time. So I'll give an example of, hey, my friend just got this text from this girl that he's trying to blow off, and she's kind of stalking him. What's like a polite way to let her down? You know, at the time, people used to use that kind of stuff as, you know, opinion openers. I'm sure you're familiar. You definitely around when that was popular. But I found that the opinion opener type stuff worked well to get out of a bad conversation topic. So if I was talking about something that was like, this is not going to create attraction, I would use something like that to kind of bring it to something more fun. Does that make sense?
Yes, totally.
So that was like the kind of experimenting, right? You know, if you're talking about the evolution, that was the initial evolution, just experimenting with, well, how do I direct a conversation? And then it was like, okay, I have to tease her. And then it was learning, well, how do I know what to tease her about, and know the difference? Because I made a lot of mistakes of, you know, being an asshole as opposed to teasing, right? Being an asshole, I always say, like, being an asshole is like if a girl has a tattoo, saying something like, oh, you're going to regret that tattoo when you're older. Like, that's kind of like it's not a fun remark. It's like you're teasing her, but you're more being an asshole. Whereas if you say like, oh, you've got a bossy side to you, let me see you stomp your feet and throw a temper tantrum, that's teasing, because you're just kind of being playful. You're not insulting her. And it took me a while to kind of walk that fine line of like learning how to tease in a way that's fun, brings it, you know, I call it bringing her back to the playground, creating that fun vibe, as opposed to, you know, when I was learning this, making a lot of those sort of asshole comments, thinking I was teasing her, thinking I was like, oh, I'm doing good, I'm making fun of her. But if you're not doing it in a fun way, it doesn't really work out so well.
Okay. Okay. Well, have you gained any insights into teasing as you've kept practicing it and getting better at it?
Yeah, you know, like one of the things I always say with teasing is you always want to tease them about the way they're acting, as opposed to who they are, or like a physical thing about them, right? So like, I like to tease a girl, and maybe she's acting naive, or like I said, bossy, or if she's being like, you know, like I call it like fucking with them, you know, where I'll just say something and like I'll totally make something up, and I'll be like, you're so gullible. You know, things that are kind of like cute, as opposed to things that are like, you know, the wrong way to do it, like I said, is like making fun of a tattoo she has, or making fun of the job she has. Like, if a girl has a job and you want to say like make fun of it, you have to realize you don't want to insult something that like she's proud of, or she's like passionate about. So you always want to look for like a trait, a personality trait that you can kind of tease her about, right?
Okay. Let
And
me,
the sooner you do it, the better. That's another thing that you want to kind of be aware of, is that the sooner in a conversation you can get at least one like banter line out, right? Something like, you're not like the funnest one, because I'm from New Jersey, and I used to go to New York a lot. And my favorite line to say to a girl in New York is, "You're not from New York. You're totally a tourist," right? Like as soon as I started talking to her, I'd make fun of her for being a tourist. And she'd be like, "Why do you say that?" "No, I live in New York." I'm like, "No, you don't. Don't lie." And it was like starting off the conversation on the immediately, like getting in some sort of tease, because then you're creating that vibe right away. Whereas if you wait too long to do it, I found that if I go into a conversation and I'm like, I'll have a normal conversation for a little bit and then I'll start teasing her, it almost gets harder the longer the conversation goes on.
well, tell me about I guess when you transition to a more intimate and personal direction. I mean, the teasing is still on the right direction, but I think a lot of guys have problems, getting things into a more intimate sexual direction.
So, I always say the thing that I always teach guys, right, is that I call it like a triangle of temptation, where you want to be balancing three things at all times. And it's not necessarily in an order. It's not like it's not like a do this first. It's mix these three things. And one is the fun, which the fun is what we talked about, the teasing, the playfulness, right? The second is connection. And that's when you're kind of revealing things about yourself. You're displaying some vulnerability. If she tells you that, "Oh, I'm a photographer," that's when you say, "Oh, really? Like my grandfather was a photographer. And I remember when we were young, we used to go up and, you kind of reveal stuff and kind of encourage her about her interests." So that's the connection. And then there's the sexuality. And the sexuality, it's when I say you bring sexuality into a conversation, it doesn't mean you blatantly talk about sex, right? And some girls, you'll find that they like that, right? You can just talk about fucking and, what you're going to do to her. But that's not, you don't need to do that. Sexuality just means stand closer to her, move in, slow the conversation down, take her hand in your hand, and kind of like begin that more intimate vibe, where you kind of look at her a little bit longer. You tell a story that's a little, my favorite kind of story to tell in that situation is a story that displays like cool vulnerability, where you kind of, you tell a story about, like, for me, it was like I always tell these stories about my childhood. I went to this sleepaway camp when I was younger that was like the worst camp ever. And it's always like the stories that are just kind of amusing of the torture I went through at this camp. And I tell it in sort of a funny way, but it's like, it's a story that slows the vibe down. And we go from kind of flirting to me telling this story, and then we move closer. But you always, like I said, you always want to be mixing all three things in. And I think the mistake guys make is one of them seems to work. Maybe the flirting seems to work, and they wind up flirting for an hour straight and they never connect with her, right? And then she doesn't answer their text because they never created any sort of like connection, right? That she went away going, "Oh, he was a fun guy." Or they talk all night about, childhood memories and all this sort of stuff, but they never created a fun or sexy vibe, and they wind up in a friend zone. So you want to balance those three styles, right? And I can repeat them again. That the fun, flirty thing is when you're teasing her. There's a lot of different tactics that you can do in that sense. You can do things like create like a mission. So a lot of times I'll say, we're going to go on a mission to do something, and you kind of, it's sort of like not a role play where you're giving her a role, but where you're kind of creating a you and me vibe. Like, hey, let's go do this together. And it's always something silly, right? Like in that realm, right? The sillier, the better. The connection realm is you getting her to open up. So you kind of find out what she's into and you relate to it. So if she just moved to New York City, I'll go back to that because I mentioned the tourist joke, right? Like I'll say, "Oh, you're a tourist." "Oh no, blah, 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 blah." So then we move to the connection realm. "Oh, so how long have you been living here?" "Oh, you moved here from Idaho. What was that like? Was that crazy coming to New York for, tell me about your first week here. Was it like totally insane? And then as she tells you about it, you kind of ask her questions and get her like sort of qualifying and, oh, that's what, so why did you decide to come here? Like getting her to kind of explain herself to you, and then reward her when she says something cool, right? So that's sort of the qualifying. And then you relate back with a little story of your own where you share a similar emotion where you might say, yeah, I've been living in New York my whole life, so I can't really relate to that. But I remember a couple summers ago, I took a road trip to wherever, and you tell her a little story that relates to that feeling of being in this whole new exotic place that's so far from home, right? You always want to relate to an emotion that she's feeling. You don't have to worry about the facts. A lot of guys are like, oh, if she tells me that she went on a trip to Hawaii, I have to tell her that I went on a trip to Hawaii. But you want to, it's the emotion that she's conveying. So if she's telling you, oh, I went on this trip to Hawaii and it was the most like beautiful thing I've ever experienced, right? You don't have to even tell her about a place you've traveled to. You can say, oh, you know what? I had that feeling recently at this art gallery I was at where I just saw something, this painting, and it was so peaceful that I just wanted to like stare at it. And one of the guards actually came over to me and was like, all right, sir, you got to move on. Whatever it is, whatever your story is that the emotion relates to her emotion, you want to relate to that. And then, like I said, the final element was the sexuality. And that's where you just begin to slow things down, to look at her a little bit longer, to touch her, to, my favorite thing to do, right, if I'm out is I'll say, hey, let's go over here, right? And I'll just take her by the hand and I'll walk her. Because once you're holding hands with her, you know that it's on. You know that you're at that intimate level that you asked me about, when you said taking it to the intimate level. That's when you actually know. You can be talking about sex and you're still not at that intimate level because in her mind, she's just, having fun. She's not really serious about it, right? She's kind of just talking about sex because it's an interesting conversation. But once you start holding her hand, then okay, we're on the same page. Like she's attracted to me, I'm attracted to you. Like it's on.
Okay, well, let's tell me a little bit about how, you mentioned that you were sort of shy and somewhat introverted. Tell me a little bit about your journey to becoming more outgoing and, how you, I guess, how you find, how you meet women like today, or I don't know if you're in a relationship or not, but how you've evolved your approaching, your meeting women basically over the time that you've been in this game, so to speak.
Yeah, so I'm in a relationship now, and my favorite. So my favorite way, and the way that I always recommend guys is that I love to build up a social circle, right? To me, like making friends with people and then having get-togethers where I invite them over and then they bring their friends and it kind of just building up a social circle was not only the way that helped me with my shyness, because I always want to be in a position where I feel like I have a little bit of status within an environment. Whereas if you go out to a bar, cold approaching, to me, there was a couple of reasons why I've done it. It's fine, but I don't enjoy it because I don't have that, I want to say the desire, right? If I'm out at a bar and I see an attractive girl, for a split second, I'm like, oh, I kind of like to go talk to her. She's kind of cute, whatever. Whereas when there's a girl that I know around from, whether it was back in college and it was the hot girl on campus, or whether it was, when I was in a bartending scene where it was like the hot bartender, I always liked the challenge of getting that one girl that I wanted. So for me, that was really the methodology that I used. Now, getting over my shyness to do it involved just simply realizing a lot of things that were holding me back from actually having these sort of conversations. A lot of it was fear, and a lot of it was technical, right? Like I just didn't know how to do it. And we kind of talked about some of the things with the teasing and the relating to the emotions, but there's just so many different things that when I realized, like, I'll give you an example, right? Like facts, right? Like a lot of people get hung up on facts, and I'm not saying that you have to lie in a conversation. What I'm saying is that when you talk to your friends and everybody's having a good time telling stories, everybody exaggerates. Everybody just kind of like, it's just, if you actually recorded a conversation with you and your friends, it would just be a whole shitload of nonsense a lot of times, except when you're like, you know, talking business or something like that. But when you're out having fun with your friends, a lot of times you guys are just having nonsensical conversations, and it's very right brained. And on the other hand, though, when you go out to meet a girl, or at least when I did, I was very left brain. I was very analytical. Everything that I said, I was worried about, right? I was always like second guessing everything that I was going to say. And I always felt like if a girl asked me a question, I had to give the honest answer. And the honest answer, I'm not saying in terms of like, I think lying is bad when you're lying to impress a girl, right? Like I would never recommend lying and saying, "Oh, I'm rich," or "I'm you know, I know a famous," like all that is just bullshit lying. What I'm talking about is just having the kind of conversation that isn't like logical. You just talk about whatever, you make shit up, and you just have fun. Like you just talk, you say stuff like, I'll give you an example. I was at a club down the road from me recently, and we're like, "Yo, we should just buy this club and totally tear it down and make our own cool club," right? And me and this girl, we talked for like, you know, 20 minutes about how we were going to buy this club and like, you know, kick out all the old people that were going to it and reinvent. And it was just like a stupid, nonsensical thing, but we both had fun just kind of riffing on it, right? And I think that back in the day, I used to think that a conversation had to be logical. Like I had to talk about in this logical order. But more and more, I began to realize that the logical conversations are great when, you know, you're trying to plan out a business strategy or you're trying to like whatever. But when you're out at a party or a bar having fun, nobody wants to have that logical conversation. They just want like the playground. They want to just joke and laugh and whatever. And it took me a while to really get that. Like I would be the guy at the party in college going, "So, you know, how's your class going? And nobody wants to talk about that at a party in college. You know, people at a party in college, they just want to like have stupid, nonsensical conversations. And that was really hard for me being a left brain guy. So that was probably the biggest obstacle, was really just releasing this need to have to be logical, and also releasing the need to feel like what I said was good enough, and realizing that, you know, when you're with your friends, it's really easy to talk to them because you're not worried if what you say is good enough. And the ironic thing, right, is that when you're with a girl and you don't worry about what you say is good enough, everything becomes more attractive because you display comfort saying it. So if you sit around in your own head for an hour coming up with like this perfect line, it's going to sound try hard. It's going to sound forced, awkward. On the other hand, if you say the stupidest thing in the world to her, "Hey, hey, I love corn dogs, you know, whatever. I'm in the mood for a taco. Where can I get it?" Like and the first thing that pops in your head as you're talking to her, it comes out natural. She's going to assume that because you're so comfortable talking to her, that like you get it. You're on the level with her, right? As opposed to the guy who's worried about what he's going to say and second guessing himself. She's going to assume that, hey, this guy's just not used to talking to attractive girls.
Yes, of course. No, I think experience is critical in our overall education and the process of becoming better with socially, and you know, both with friends and with women. And I guess that's, you know, one of my big directions is to find out you know, what the benefits of experience have been for you. For example, you know, what refinements have you made in some of the things that you've done that worked in the past that maybe now you do them a little bit better?
I mean, it's everything, right? Like in the past, I used to try to figure out a way to slip things that I thought were cool into a conversation. So let's just say that I had recently been to Brazil on vacation, right? I would try to bring the conversation towards that topic because I thought it would impress the girl that, hey, I travel, I've been to this exotic place, I can talk about it. So in my head, I would be stuck going, trying to figure out a way I can bring this into the conversation. If I, years ago when I was working as a real estate agent, I had a listing of somebody that was famous, right? Where I was selling their house. And I remember being out at a bar trying to figure out how I can like tell this girl that I was the real estate agent for this famous football player, right? And like I didn't get it, right? You're talking about like experience. Well, it took me a really long time to realize that, like, hey, just because that is impressive to me, it doesn't make the conversation better, right? It's not creating an emotion in her that's going to make it better. So, kind of going back to exactly what I was just saying is that just realizing that I can talk about anything initially, right? You still have to balance in that sexuality, right? That I talked about. And one way to do it, like if you want like a specific sort of 3 steps that I realized and I kind of maintained in myself was, if I'm talking to a girl, and I don't know if this is the shyness, angle that you're asking about, but if you want to, if you're just talking about tweaks that I made along the way, going all the way back to that story that I had told initially about the girl at the party that I was talking about health food all night with. So there was this handful of mistakes there. So how did I fix them going forward? Well, I realized that at some point you need to, what I call, downshift into different gears. You got to move it forward, right? And the first step to doing that, I call, is moving the conversation to a rated R level. So I had the habit of being in that PG nice guy level. And at some point, you can bring something into the conversation that allows her to feel like, okay, we don't have to be PG conversation. We can open up a little bit and talk about edgier stuff. So maybe you can make a comment about, like, if you're out at a restaurant and you see a couple, you're on a date with a girl and you can be like, oh, that couple over there, they're totally the swinger type, right? Like, wouldn't you just imagine that they were swingers? Or another example of how you can do this. I used to have a painting company and I would tell a story on a date. I would tell the story. Yeah, being a painter, it was all right. One of the funny things that I always found was the stuff you find in people's closets when you're painting their house. This older woman, Rhonda, we painted her house a few times. And one of the times I was in her closet, and just like you have to move stuff, and a big box of sex toys falls. And just as I'm like trying to like get it back in the bag and hang it back up, the woman walks in, and this is this awkward moment of her realizing that I, stumbled onto her bag of sex toys. And then I would turn to the girl and I would say, so what about you? What would I find in your closet? Like, what are you hiding? So that would be a way where I would bring it from just casual conversation to bringing in an edgy topic like sex toys or something like that. And I wouldn't be direct. Like, I wouldn't be like, what sex toys do you have? I would say it in a third person story. But my purpose is not to talk about sex toys. It's to allow her to know, like, hey, we don't have to pretend that we're both like innocent angels. We can have an adult conversation here. We're not kids, like, we're adults. So that's like the first step that I realized. Then the second step I realized is, at some point you've got to say something that lets her know you're into her in a physical level, right? It could be something as saying like, wow, come here, your perfume smells really good, it's turning me on. Or like, you have a really sexy smile. something that's like, as you're talking to her, where it's like, okay, this isn't just a friendly conversation. He's into me. Now, that, you know, that's like the 2 levels. The third would be, you know, getting it a little bit more intimate, where you kind of begin pushing her a little bit more. So I gave you the example saying, what's in your closet? A little bit later on, you might start getting a little bit more into that kind of stuff. So that was like one of the things I realized, is that you want to always be downshifting, right? You don't want to stay in the same gear for too long. You don't want to be in like nice guy mode for an hour and a half. You can get in nice guy mode, but you got to figure out a way to kind of get into that little edgier conversation rather quickly. So best way that I found to do it was either using a story or making an observation about something around me that brought a little edginess into it. And then from there, you make some sort of comment about her, right? That is like, the way I always say it is like, say something to her that you wouldn't say to a friend, right? Like, you're not going to tell a friend that, you know, your cologne smells really good. You know, like, you wouldn't say that to them. You would say it to somebody you were attracted to. So you want to say something to her that is not something you would say to a friend, so that she knows, like, you're letting it be known, like, I'm not talking to you to be friends, right? I'm talking to you in a man attracted to a woman sort of way.
So once you've established a little bit of attraction, what's your next step? I mean, do you get their phone number? Do you date them? Do you insta-date them? Like, what's your usual approach?
Give me an idea of where, you know, it depends where I'm meeting them. So the girl that I'm with now, with her, I hit on her pretty relentlessly the night I met her. And I was introduced to her, like, she was at a friend's party she showed up at. And I hit on her. I tried to get her number. She wouldn't give it to me. I found her on Facebook. She ignored me, but I just kept I kept wearing her down, and then I got her out again. I kept trying, like, what I always say to guys is, like, the easiest thing to do is just keep inviting them somewhere, right? With her on Facebook, I would just be like, hey, I'm having and remember with the girl that I'm with, we had mutual friends. So there was an ability to do this, right? I could contact her and say, hey, a few of us are going to be hanging out. Why don't you come? Like, your friend Daria is going to be there. Why don't you join us? And it was natural, right? So in that sort of environment, that's what I would do. If with her anyway, with a different type, if I was meeting a girl at a bar, I would always try to get the phone number. I mean, if the vibe was good, I would usually go, like, you know, if I was at a bar and we're all over each other, I'm going to try to get her back home that night, because even if she says no, it's still better to go for it, because at least then you're getting your intention out, right? She knows what you want. So I would, like, normally if I'm out, I would say, like, you know, it all depends on circumstance. So if I was out with friends, I might say, like, hey, so what are you doing for the after party? And try to say, hey, we're going to have a few people back at our place. You know, in that sort of environment. If I was out by myself and maybe I had a dog, and I would be like, I've got the cutest, you got to come meet my dog. My dog would love you. And I would use that as an excuse, like, hey, I've got a bottle of wine back at home. You can meet my dog. And, like, just any excuse, really, like, that you can have. Like, I make the best margaritas. Let's go back and have one. Like, it really doesn't matter. You need an excuse, though. You can't say, like, hey, why don't you come home with me? Like, you got to have some reason that you both kind of know it's a bullshit reason, but by throwing it out there, you've let her know, like, I'm inviting you home. Now, a lot of times when you're out, the girl's going to just say no. Logistically, it's not going to happen. Her friends drove, she's got work, and there's 100 reasons why she's not going to go. But just by throwing it out there, you've shown her that you've got a little bit of balls, that you're, like, not scared to go for it. And for women, that's a turn on, as opposed to the guy who thinks, like, he's being respectful by not inviting her. That guy just gets forgotten.
Yes, definitely. You've got to make an impression. Okay. Well, tell me a little bit about how you, I guess, moved the relationship, you know, from you were persistent, and I know persistence is a very effective tactic for a lot of guys that in order to establish the beginnings of the relationship with women. They start off and they're difficult and they're refusing you, and if you just keep at it, you often can break them down sooner or later, because they see that you really want it, rather than you're just sort of asking her out like just anybody else. Like, here you're really keeping after them, it's because you really want them and you're really interested, and that's kind of the thing that they're looking for in a lot of ways.
Persistence works better the higher status you have. So like, I knew with the girl I'm with, I mean, at this point in my life, like when I had met her, I was pretty good at that point, and she knew of me from friends. So she knew that, like, that I had dated a lot of girls. Like, so she knew. So I could be persistent, right? But if you're coming at it from a position where the girl doesn't see you as having status, in that case, persistence could backfire. It could make you look a little needy, a little clingy. So like, it's very, I know guys hate this because they want a black and white answer to stuff, but I always say the less status the girl gives you, the more you kind of have to play the mind games a little bit, where you kind of play hot and cold and you kind of let her wonder what you're thinking. Whereas the more status she gives you, it's like you still have to play the game, but you can be more persistent, because in her mind, like, I knew with my girl, like, I knew that she had probably heard from friends that, oh, he was with this girl. So I knew that, like, I didn't have to worry about her, like, giving off this impression like I was this lonely guy and she was the only girl in my life, right? That, like, I knew that I wasn't giving that impression off. But I'm very careful with my students to say, like, you've got to know how a girl views you, because if she doesn't view you as a cool, like, guy who has a lot of stuff going on in his life, and you're texting her all the time or you're constantly hitting her up, she may think you're desperate. So it's a fine line you got to walk there. So I wish I can give you a clear answer, but it's really based on her perception of you, and you got to be clear about that. Like, you got to know. And most guys, they don't really pay enough attention of, like, well, what's the perception a girl is going to have of me? I know that the perception somebody has of me like, if I walked into like a nightclub, that's not my scene, right? I don't like nightclubs. I don't dance good. Like, I'm going to have very low status in that environment. So I'm going to have to work it a little bit differently than if I'm at, like, a business networking event where I kind of know people and, like, I kind of have a little bit more status. So it all depends on the perception the woman has of you is sort of how you're going to, how much persistence and whatnot you can display.
Okay. I guess I'm curious about, your students. I know that you have students and you've been having them for a long time. What sort of common sticking points do you keep running into with them, and do you have any particularly interesting solutions that you pass along to some of them for those issues?
So nowadays, because most of my customers find me through my Unlock Her Legs program, most of the ones that hire me for personal coaching are hiring me because they have a specific girl that they mess things up with, right? I don't like to give, like, I'll kind of be generic, because I feel like it's intrusive to give specific examples of guys that I have private conversations with. But let's say the guy went out on a few dates with a girl. He didn't make a move and he winds up in the friend zone, but now he still sees her because he works with her, right? It's a common sort of scenario of the guys I teach. What I usually do is, first off, we run down their mistakes, and it's almost always apparent that they make the mistake of being too eager, too available. They confess their feelings to her before even kissing her, right? And I always say, if once a girl knows she has you, it's over, right? A girl needs the curiosity, the intrigue of not knowing how the movie's going to end, right? Most nice guys, the woman knows how the movie's going to end, as soon as it starts. And what I always have these guys do is I say, okay, reverse engineer from her point of view. She knew she had you. Like, you made it abundantly clear that you wanted to be her boyfriend. And so to back up, right, just to give a little piece of advice that I always give guys, a girl can know you want to have sex with her early on. That's perfectly normal. She expects that you want to have sex with her, but she can't know you want to be her boyfriend, because then the game's over. Then she's like, oh, she doesn't have to work for anything. Most guys do the opposite. Most guys hide the fact that they want to have sex with her, and they go and try to prove that they want to be her boyfriend. And by doing that, they wind up in the friend zone. So most of the guys that wind up hiring me for private coaching, it's because they've been in this position where they've kind of gotten the friend zone, or they can sense the girl slipping away. So a lot of what I have to do is first damage control. And that means we have to interrupt the pattern that she has of their relationship, right? So what we do is we identify all the ways that they're giving her the power. And I call these rules. So I'll walk through with them and I'll say, okay, like you guys text each other. Who always ends the text conversation first, right? And 99% of the time they'll say, oh yeah, she's always the one who ends it. Who's always the one who asks the other person to hang out? I'm always the one who has to ask her to hang out. And then it's more subtle things. When you hang out with her, whose music do you listen to? Like, if you guys don't have the similar taste in music and you get in the car, whose music do you listen to? And we always put the station she likes on. When you go to a restaurant, if I had one of my coaching clients was dating a vegetarian, and he would only take her to vegetarian restaurants. And I said, well, are you a vegetarian? And he's like, no, I love meat. I go, well, then why do you only go to vegetarian places? Like, you deserve some, like, she's going to think that, you're basically giving her all the power. Like, she can eat a salad at a steakhouse. It's not a big deal every once in a while. It's little mistakes like that, where these guys, like, you're probably familiar with putting a girl on a pedestal. And one of the, the first things I do is figure out how to knock a girl off the pedestal. And it's not about insulting her. It's about simple things like it's the things you don't think about. Like, when you get in a car with her and she's used to you putting on, the hip hop station that she likes, but now you put on the heavy metal station that you like, and she goes to change it and you go, hey, I was listening to that. She's going to go, wow, like he's not trying, like, oh. And when she notices that, she's like, oh shit, I have to try a little bit harder. And that's ideally what you want. You want her trying to impress you. You want her working to win you over. Because if she feels like she's already won you over, there's no game left for her to play. And she gets bored and she starts looking for another guy who's not so easy to win over. So going back to what I teach these guys, in the beginning, the first thing I do is that I figure out, okay, whatever their situation is, what can we start doing that's going to shift that balance of power to get you out of the friend zone, or to get you out of the acquaintance zone, or whatever. Obviously, if they're hiring me, they're not currently like in a good place with the girl, right? Normally they're hiring me because they messed up. So my first working with them is kind of what I call the pattern interrupt, is trying to figure out ways that they can change the girl's perception of them. Well, that makes sense. I know I threw a lot at you, but I was trying to encapsulate a lot of different things there.
Well, I think, you probably run into a lot of guys who, have a, they're not quite giving off that impression of being someone that is that attractive necessarily, or they don't see themselves as that attractive. And, you've got a pretty big, inner games hurdle that you've got to deal with to start with. And then, you've got to get them to, get past their own thinking, and then to present themselves in a way that the girl finds them attractive. So I guess what I'm talking about is more, I think there's a lot of guys that come to coaches who are let's say, more backward than others. And I'm just curious, like, if you have any shortcuts for those kind of guys.
Yeah, I mean, it's really about, like, for me, the kind of guy, the guys that generally hire. I mean, I have customer for products is a whole range of people, but the guys that I work with personally, it's there's inner game issues, but it's always about these beliefs they have that that they have to tackle, right? It's more about figuring out things like, acting like a gentleman is not just because you've been programmed that your entire life, that you have to treat women like they're these angelic creatures, and that's not really what works. And even though we see that it's not what works, and we see that the guys that are like sleeping with all the good girls that we like aren't are not treating them the way that we're treating them, we still hang on to this like Disney, like kind of pop song mentality of like, well, if I just I send a girl flowers to work. I mean, I've had guys that have said to me, I made the girl a mixtape, right? And I'm like, well, why would you do that? And then they're asking me on another call, like, well, I think if I give her another one, I'm like, that didn't work. Why? What is this sticking thing that you want to keep going back to what's not working? If you're asking about inner game, to me, it's more about breaking things that aren't working, like, and stopping to believe, like, there's these beliefs that guys suffer from, of like, well, if I say, okay, you got to pull your attention away from a girl, right? You got to go cold for a little bit because you've shown too much interest. Now it's time to kind of go and pull some of your attention away. And they start thinking, well, if I do that, she's gonna leave me. And I say, like, have you ever had a girl, like, let me ask you, Cliff, have you ever had a girl that you were into and all of a sudden she didn't answer your text for a couple of days?
Oh, for sure.
Did you like her more or less for those 2 days?
Well, for a lot of them, it's a game, and others, will claim that they were just busy. If you wanted to talk to me, call me again, that sort of thing.
But what I'm saying is, during that 2 days, right, when she wasn't answering your text and you were thinking about her,
definitely,
you want her more or less.
Oh yeah, no, it definitely pushes the gas pedal down on the attraction, for sure.
And the thing is, as guys, we can recognize, right? We recognize, but for some reason we don't like, we feel like we have to let her know and be certain, right? Like, if I don't text her back, she's not going to think I really like her and she's going to go find somebody else. But I always try to explain, well, when a girl doesn't text you back, do you say that, or do you sit around by your phone, like you said, pushing the gas pedal down on your interest level? So we have this tendency to think like, well, it's different for girls, but attraction is very much similar. The psychology of it is very similar for men and women, right? We fall in love, men and women. You don't fall in love with somebody when you're with them. You fall in love with them when you're away from them, thinking about them. And, as a guy, when we like a girl, we don't want to give her that uncertainty. We want to, like, let her know and kind of lock it down. And, like, we hate that uncertainty, right? That vulnerability of liking somebody. But when you try to lock it down and you try to get rid of all the uncertainty, you also get rid of the excitement, and you don't give her anything to think about, right? So then she goes home and she gets your text, I can't wait to see you again. And then the next day you're like, when can you hang out? And you don't give her, I think it was David D'Angelo back in the day, give her the gift of missing you. Guys are scared to give them that gift. So I know that, your question about inner game, to me, it's I found that it's like, it's inner beliefs as so much. It's not really self-confidence. I think guys do lack self-confidence. I mean, it's obvious, but I think a lot of lacking self-confidence is based on these beliefs. Even going back, right? Like, when we talked about me overcoming my shyness stemmed from this belief that I had to say impressive things, and that I had to have this, like, professional, like, conversation with a woman and logical, and it was that belief that was wrong. And when I shattered that belief, when I was able to go, whoa, I don't need to, like, I can say whatever I want and it doesn't matter, it really helped me. And that's why I think it's really getting rid of beliefs, false beliefs that give you that self-confidence, rather than, I'm not a proponent basically of saying go and recite after, although I do visualizations and affirmations and all that kind of stuff. I don't think it's like going to build you self-confidence. I think they have their place because it keeps you on a path. But as far as building self-confidence, to me, it's like, it's shattering beliefs that you've grown up with that have held you back. Supplication, right? Supplication is when you think you have to do things. Like if a girl, I've watched it, girls go to guys and go, hold this for a second, and then walk away, and the guy's just holding it for like 20 minutes, and he's like scared to put it down or whatever because it might make her mad. Yet when one of their friends says, hold this, they'll be like, hold your own drink, man. Like, I'm not holding that. Like, but they're scared to say that to a girl. And the big realization is if you treat a girl the way you treat your friend, in terms of like not kissing her ass and not supplicating and not treating her like she's better than you, she's actually going to respect you more and be more attracted to you.
Yeah, no, I learned a long time ago that let her be the one that worries about you rather than the other way around. Like how you talked about when she doesn't return your text for a couple of days. I try and do that myself. In some circumstances. I tend to sort of reward their behavior with whatever it is they're giving to me, rather than the other way around, and just sort of let them set the pace of these things. But tell us a little bit more about your Unlock Her Legs program. That sounded kind of interesting.
So the whole program was based around something that Rob and I call the Scrambler. And the Scrambler, and that, like I said, most of the guys that hire me for private coaching is they want me to walk them through the Scrambler, because what it is it's really like, it's the game, right? Like it's kind of reverse engineering. Like, and off topic, it's kind of funny because as I deal with guys, right, and most of the guys that are hiring me because they have one girl that they're obsessed about, right? And I say, okay, walk me through what she's doing, what happened, right? And they walk me through it, and I go, well, what does it sound like she did? And they're always like, holy shit, she did the Scrambler on me. And I'm like, obviously we both know that she didn't, learn the script, but it's just because when you reverse engineer what went on, and I reverse engineer this process of getting to that state of infatuation or obsession, it really revolves around this like roller coaster of emotions. And when you think about the girl that gets you the most obsessed with her, it's the one you can't quite figure out, right? You're constantly wondering. 1 minute, like, she's totally into you and she's validating you and she's telling you, like, she makes you feel like the king of the world. And then another day she kind of acts bored around you and you're like, what did I do? Why doesn't she like me as much today? And then you start trying harder and then you don't hear from her. And it's like this roller coaster. And next thing you know, you're like on Google, like on forums going, what did it mean when and you're like asking all your friends about her, and you're constantly going, hey man, like you're calling up to try to talk about her, and you're just in this like quicksand of like trying to figure out what's going on with her. And the more you're doing that, the more you're falling in love with her. And when I realized that, I realized, okay, well, let's reverse engineer that. And that's essentially what works on girls. And that's why when you look back and guys are like, oh, women fall for assholes, right? Or women fall for jerks. They don't fall for jerks because they like shitty, being treated shitty, right? Nobody likes to be treated shitty. Jerks, they don't fall for jerks for that. They fall for jerks, and we call them jerks because these guys have so much going on in their life that they play this game with a woman naturally, right? They're juggling multiple girls, so they're like, they're never giving the girl their full attention. So the girl's always fighting for it, and it gets her more and more obsessed with chasing this guy. So kind of a combination of reverse engineering why girls chase jerks and also why we fall in love with certain girls. I kind of backward engineered it. And what I, like I said, it's called the Scrambler. It starts with the first portion, what I went through earlier, is all about interrupting her pattern, right? Because a girl views you in a certain way right now, right? Maybe she views you in the friend zone. She views you as a guy who maybe she didn't feel a sexual connection, whatever it is, right? There's certain things that led to that. And you want to kind of figure out what they are, then begin breaking that pattern, because there needs to be confusion there, right? You can't just go from like friend zone to, girlfriend. And a lot of guys think, oh, if I just tell her how I feel, I can move from the friend zone to the boyfriend zone. But there's got to be this like confusion that kind of opens up a door where you can then start changing her opinion and start dialing in the attraction. So that's step one of it, is really I mentioned the rules and identifying these rules that exist. Then it gets into finding things where you can validate her, right? Because one of the key ingredients is she's got to feel like she's working to win you over, and that you're noticing things about her that you're finding more and more attractive, and she's winning you over. You want to give her that feeling. So there's a lot of different elements to it, but the Scrambler is like, we call it a mind game. It's mind game sounds cynical, but in reality, you're really just giving her what she wants, right? This is what she wants. She wants you to play the game, right? Like, I know that, like, in theory, when I'm dating a girl, I hate when she's like cancels plans, or I hate when she doesn't text me back, but I like it because it's like, it keeps that excitement alive, as opposed to like, if I'm dating a girl and after like 3 weeks, she's like, we should move in together. Like, I'm like, oh God, this is too easy. Something must be wrong with her. So a lot of it is about giving them what they really want, which is the challenge, the game, the chase.
Yes, I think one of the things I've certainly picked up on with women is that what they say and what they do are two totally different things. They'll tell you, oh, I want a stable relationship with love and this and that, and yet they're always dating these guys who drive them crazy.
Yeah, exactly.
And and then they just don't see it. Like they think they want to change the guy, and then if they ever were successful in changing him, then they'd be bored, and then they drop the guy.
No, you're 100% right. And it's funny, I've seen friends of mine who, like, they start dating a girl, and maybe when they started dating her, they were like in a cover band, right? And maybe the girl was like really attracted to the fact that they were in this band, but then they start dating her, and she's like starts complaining about, oh, you spend too much time in the band. You should spend more time with me. And soon enough, they stop hanging out with their friends, or they stop, playing in the band, or whatever their passion was. And it makes the girl actually respect them less and less attracted to them. Like you said, they say they want something, but when you give it to them, all of a sudden it has the opposite effect. You can never go by what they say they want. It's the worst advice in the world is listen to what they say they want. Well,
to the best of my recollection, the very first piece of advice a guy usually gets about women is don't listen to what they say, pay attention to what they do.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. And I tend to point this out to women all the time. Like I had a chat with a friend today who's been dating this guy who's been driving her absolutely crazy, and she's like complaining, but meanwhile she's with the guy for 2 years.
Yeah.
It's like, why don't you just admit that you like this because you're sticking around for it?
Exactly. It's funny, and you can't. They'll rationalize. It's not that. It's that. He's really a good person. Like they'll have a lot of different reasons of why it's not that, but it's that. It's funny.
Well, maybe you can tell the viewers a little bit more about how they could get a copy of your Unlock Her Legs program. And I just, before I go into that, or before you go into that, rather, one thing I mentioned, that if you are to, if someone watching this is to purchase a program or coaching or something from Bobby, If you send us both an email telling us that you found out about this through this webinar or through Cliff's List, I will send you, in addition, a completely free additional product from one of our Cliff's List special products. So that as a bonus and as a thank you for having responded to this webinar and to the interview with Bobby. Maybe now, so you could tell us a little bit more about how they could obtain the this product. And
I'll put together a special link for your listeners at unlockherlegs.com/Cliff. And that video, there'll be a video there, and it'll explain a few things in that video that are really essential to the program, Unlock Her Legs, and also to the Scrambler itself, right? There's what I call them the 4 weapons of the chase, and I can go through a couple of them now, but in the video I go much deeper into it. And those are uncertainty, which we already talked about, right? We talked about anticipation a little bit, right? Anticipation is like a masterful weapon for creating desire, and most guys have no ability to make a woman anticipate something. So that video will do a lot better explanation of what they'll learn in Unlock Her Legs than I would. So for your listeners, unlockherlegs.com/Cliff, and definitely send Cliff a message if you decide to, take us up on this training, because I know he's got some really cool bonuses for you.
Well, that was good. Now, look, I appreciate that, and I'm glad that we had some time to spend together to explore some of your ideas and concepts. And I'm sure the guys have learned a few good tips from this, and hopefully we'll do another one like this pretty soon.
Yeah, I'm happy that we finally jumped on a call. Like I said, I used to read your newsletter. I remember when I started TSB Mag, like in 2006. I remember back then I was reading your newsletter. So it's been a while now. So yeah, it's great to finally get a hold of you and sit down and talk to you.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure, and I want to thank you again. And I hope all the guys who are listening to this appreciate it. And we're definitely interested to hear your comments on this. And if you have any further questions, please email us, and let's keep the dialogue going.
Awesome.
So thanks again, Bobby.
Thank you, Cliff.